afternoon, everyone. Does the sound good? Yes. A new season, 36th year here in Batavia. And we've been in the library as long as it's been built, so 20 plus years. 22 years now. I'm Becky Hogue. My parents started this program. We were at the Methodist Church for years. We outgrew it. They built the library, and my dad said, let's see if we can go over there. And they've been wonderful because we don't have to set the chairs up anymore. And we have food next door. We used to sell coffee and pop and lug it all over. And so I hope everybody's enjoying the cafe next door, and get your lunch if you want ahead of time. I want to thank the library, though. Kristen and Kristen, we got two, one's with an I, one's with an E, and helped me so much with promoting the program, setting it up, being our partner for Books Between Bites. And I'm going to let Kristen introduce our speaker, but we have some flyers at the back, and they have them in the library, but somebody took them over the last day or so. I was like, where are the flyers? So the whole season is on the flyer, and the website address that I keep up with a little more information about our speakers and the books that won't fit on this flyer. And I have a green clipboard at the back, and if you're interested in signing up for my email notices I send out once a month, please go ahead and sign back on that at the end. It's on the back table, and you'll get a notice from me once a month announcing the next program. So I want to thank Barb. Maps has been on behalf of BATV. She's been filming for years and gets here early and sets up, and it's just a wonderful contribution. And the videos are posted on BATV's YouTube channel, and we have all the back ones on there for the last few years. So if you go to the website, I have links, and you can watch some of our past programs, and this will be up in another week or two. So Kristen Schultz, Kristen Campbell back there. I have you welcome our speaker.
Hi, I'm Kristen, one of the reference librarians here, and I'm really pleased to announce today's speaker is Sue Campbell. Locals know Sue as a fixture at the library, where she staffs the Friends of Batavia Library monthly book sales and appears each Halloween, so this is coming up, in the guise of the library witch. She's very funny. A member of the Fermilab Arts and Lecture Committee for many years, she took to the stage in the 800-seat auditorium to announce events and got a jolt of adrenaline every time by making the audience laugh. Welcome, Sue. Thank you. That was lovely. Am I audible? Yes. Am I visible? Yes. Oh, okay, the important things. It was lovely of you to introduce me like that. And as I look around, I see people who may know me from different guises. When I'm in the supermarket, sometimes people will walk up and go, I know you, but I don't know from where. So to help some of you out, perhaps you know me as a literacy volunteer. I'm in and out of the library all the time tutoring, and it's one of the joys of my life. Kristen mentioned the fact that for the last, since 1991, I don't do math very well, I have been volunteering at Fermilab as parts of their arts and lecture series. And as she said, I got such a kick out of telling people that they had to turn off all of their electronic devices, including their pacemakers, or the lab would zap them. Some of you may know me from Peck Farm, where for years I was a docent in the butterfly house. If you brought yourself, your children, or your grandchildren there, chances are very good that I taught you all the appropriate word for butterfly excrement. There will be a special award for anyone who remembers what it is. Come on now, speak up. Obviously, I didn't do a very good job. The word is frass, F-R-A-S-S, and you will find that handy when you're playing Scrabble. One of my ultimate favorite places where you may know me from is Fox Valley Wildlife, which is now subsumed by Anderson Animal Shelter. And I spent many years there working with rescuing orphaned and injured birds so that they could be released and resume their life in the wild. Some of you might know me from my neighborhood, where I am a dog walker. The library, unfortunately, had a strict policy about bringing in dogs, and there was no way I was going to do it. I think probably some of you might know me from the locker room at Delnor. Oh, I can't strip down. I'm sorry. The library has even stricter rules about that. But this, I hope, is where you all know me from the most, as friends of Batavia Library. And I get to have a commercial. Please come to the book sales. Donate your used and old books to us. Every single cent that's earned helps make this library a bigger, stronger, and more vital place. And you know how important libraries are. Well, I wondered why on God's earth was I asked to do a presentation at Books Between Bites. Becky told you why. It's been running for 36 years. They've run out of people to ask. So here I am. You'll have to put up with me. I went through a lot of hemming and hawing with Kristen, trying to figure out what topic should I talk about. Antarctica is one of my passions, and yes, I have been there. And the ecology is changing so much because of climate change that there's lots of books about that now, but no, didn't fly. What about the interface of wildlife and suburbia? Good books out about that now too, but you're having a great speaker, Valerie Blaine, who is an expert on wildlife, and believe me, I'm nowhere near her category. How about my favorite topic of the moment, death and dying? It's nearer and dearer to me every day, you better believe it. But that was deemed too depressing. So I was left with humor. I'll try to let this story tell itself and not try to be funny. The book, Cheaper by the Dozen, is full of a gentle humor, but full of real and timeless life situations. You can see yourself, your family, your upbringing so many times in it. So, who are the Gilbreths anyway? And why are they important? Frank Sr., who I probably will call father most of the time, with his wife Lillian Mahler Gilbreth, was an industrial engineer, an inventor, a pioneer in time and motion studies, scientific management, and ergonomics. He came from a working class background, being born in Maine, and his father died when he was very young. His mother was a school teacher, but couldn't keep all 8 kids going, so she opened a boarding house, and Frank got to meet a constant flow of interesting and challenging people. He was not the brightest, or perhaps I should say the most well-behaved of students. School was not his métier. But he managed to pass the entrance exams into MIT. Did he go? No, he became a bricklayer's apprentice instead, and was enormously challenging as that. He looked around and saw that all of the guys on the job were laying bricks differently. Some were bending down to pick them up, others did brick by, there was just a variety of styles. And he tried to learn from the best, but he realized not one person was the best. People had different ideas that could all be incorporated. And of course, that made his boss furious. What are you doing? You're interrupting work, you're looking at people, you're not laying your bricks. Come on, do your job. So Frank did his job, and he did it exceptionally well. What he did was build a scaffold to hold his bricks, so that they were always at the appropriate level for him to work on. He didn't have to keep bending and stretching. Things were loaded to the right height. And that scaffold is still in use today. It's not called the Gilbreth scaffold, but what the hell? He did it, he invented it. Now, he learned everything there was to know about bricklaying. But he also learned everything there was to know about the construction business. So he went into the construction business for himself. And because he had spent so much time looking at how people work and the most economical way to do things, he was enormously successful at it. He built factories, dams, powerhouses, paper mills. He really was not like your local backyard contractor. He was a successful man. His motto was, and I say this with all due respect to Bill Gates, who people think said it, but indeed he was quoting Mr. Gilbreth. And it's my motto too. Choose a lazy person to do a difficult job, because a lazy person will find an easy way to do it. Yes, and that's true. Mother, Lillian Mahler Gilbreth, came from a very genteel and well-to-do family in California. She was one of 8 children as well. They were all college educated, all bright-eyed, and just invested in their community and in themselves and in their lives. Lillian was taking her required trip to Europe to learn how the other people live when she met Frank Gilbreth. And somehow they struck up a relationship. God knows how, because she was very proper and prim, and he was, well, he came from the working class side of the world. But indeed they did, and marriage was eventually suggested, and off they went to California to meet her family and get her father's blessing for a wedding. Well, that wasn't such a tremendous success. The family was dismayed that her choice of a husband was someone so uncouth and in the building trades. But they would not stand in the way of their daughter and ultimately accepted the fact that they would be married. Frank very shortly won their hearts when they were having some repairs done in the house. Actually, they were having a fireplace built. And they had a bricklayer who was doing the building. And Frank stood there and watched him for a while and said, "Gosh, that looks real simple. Probably anybody could do it." The bricklayer goes, "Oh no, this is a job for an expert." Frank goes, "Well, I bet it doesn't really take so much to do it. Here, let me try." The chimney was built, fireplace was built in no time flat. And the bricklayer was in total awe, and so were the Mahler family. Not only could that man talk a good story, he could work. Okay, so I have introduced you to Mr. and Mrs. Gilbreth. Mrs. Gilbreth, Lily, brought psychology into industrial engineering and time management. She was a lecturer, an author, involved in research. Her time and motion studies revolutionized the way the kitchens are laid out, and those ideas are still in practice today. She eventually became an author, a college professor. Did I mention that during all of this, she gave birth to and raised 12 children? Yeah, that's a working woman for you. After her husband's death in 1924, she kept right on with the company, didn't miss a beat, went to Europe to speak at a conference immediately after his death, and hit the ground running. The Gilbreths applied all of their research and studies to raising their family. Anne, Mary, Ernestine, Martha, Frank, Bill, Lillian, Fred, Dan, John, Bob, and Jane. You can note, I read that. There were some things that I do know by heart, and some names that I do know by heart. Does anyone remember the Dion quintuplets?
Yes, I do.
Okay, who can name them?
Oh, Marie was one of them.
Good job. Come on.
Antoinette?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
Yes. Come on, only 3 more to go. Remember, the YMCA plus Emily. Yvonne, Marie, Cecile, Annette, and Emily. Come on now. You all know mnemonic devices as a way of remembering things. It was one of Mr. Gilbreth's primary teachings. Okay, you flunked that test. You came close. Great Lakes, please. Who can name the Great Lakes? Rattle them off. Yes.
Ontario, Erie, Huron, Michigan, and Superior.
Yes. Easy if you remember the word homes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. Makes it easy.
Right.
Everything that the Gilbreths did was about finding easy and economical ways to do things. And believe me, when you have 12 kids in the house, economy and ease are 2 things you consider a lot. There was one other thing that Mr. Gilbreth reminded his children of, much to the horror and consternation of his genteel wife, Lily. He had taken them on an exploring trip to a cave and pointed out to them the things coming down from the top and the things coming up from the bottom, stalactites and stalagmites. He said to the children, "Do you know how to remember the difference between them?"
The stalagmites might reach up. Stalactites hang tight.
That's wonderful.
I know that too.
You knew that too. Well, Mr. Gilbreth had a little more bawdy version. He told his children to think of a ballerina on an anthill. The mites go up then the tights come down. Okay, raising 12 children. Oh, first, let me show you what I am holding. Let me see if I can get the click forward. Yes, this is a treasure beyond belief. A woman brought this to share with us. It is a first edition of the book that was published in 1948. And I want to read you the dedication. The book was written by two of the Gilbert children and dedicated to Dad, who only reared 12 children, and to Mother, who reared 12 only children. That lets you know the big difference in parenting techniques and style. Okay. Voila. Before I talk about that, I want to tell you where the illustrations come from. Konstantin Alhavel, you like that? Alhavel, is the illustrator. And he led a colorful life. He fled Russia as a youth. He had been an art student in 1917 because he was conscripted by the revolutionaries to paint murals. And he fled to Persia, which is now Iran, and the Shah for whom he was working as a court painter was executed. And he knew he would be the next one hung, so he left town quickly, ended up starving in Constantinople, and emigrated to the United States in 1923. By 1926, he was a well-known muralist, illustrator, cartoonist. He satirized American life. You may know him from covers from the Saturday Evening Post from 1945 to 1962, if any of you are old enough to remember. He made 170 covers for the New Yorker magazine, 43 cartoons. This guy was prolific. He was a sports cartoonist for the New York Post in the 1930s, did covers for Fortune, Harper's Bazaar, Vogue, Town and Country. He was everywhere. But I know him and love him best as a book illustrator. Everything from the first edition of Gershwin's Best American Songbook to the Cheaper by the Dozen books. But now, to talk about what you're looking at. There's Dad shaving. Dad always thought there was a quicker and easier way to do things. Men back in those days wore vests with many buttons. He learned that it was much more efficient to button them from the bottom up than the top down. He looked at the amount of time he was spending shaving and thought, aha, there must be an easier way. So he got out 2 soap dishes, 2 brushes, and 2 straight razors. He lathered himself up, got out the razors, and total failure. He spent more time putting sticking plasters on his face than he saved by his shaving methods. It was a flop. But he didn't give up using 2 shaving brushes. He maximized that technique. Let's see. Okay. Oh, Foolish Carriage. Oh, Foolish Carriage was loved and hated by the Gilbert family. It would only run for Mr. Gilbert. It was very temperamental, very hard to start. It had a crank in the front, and God help you if you didn't let go at the right moment, because it could break your arm. Foolish Carriage was actually 2 Pierce Arrow chassis. Chassis? Is it like bison? If we have a grammarian in the house, I would really like to know what to do. Well, let's call them bodies, two Pierce Arrow bodies that have been welded together to accommodate the large family. Have any of you ever traveled with more than one child in a car? You know what an ordeal that can be. Just imagine what it was like with 12 of the little darlings in there. Mother and the current baby always sat in the front. Frank, slow down. Don't do that. Look out for that passenger. She was not a calm and placid. I guess she wasn't a backseat driver, side seat driver. One of the children, Bill, learned to imitate her voice perfectly and would lean over from the back and tap his father's arm. Slow down, this is dangerous. And father would go, shut up, Lily, everything's fine. And she'd go, I didn't say a word. Anyway, source of lots of trouble. Each of the older children were responsible for taking care of one of the younger children, and the kids in the middle just basically ran wild. There was much squabbling and jockeying around to get the best positions in the car. The girls suffered endless embarrassment because they were forced to wear long white dusters over their clothes, hats with veils. It was a nightmare. Of course, people along the road would point at them. Ha, 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 look at those people, look at those yokels. Hey, mister, why do you have so many kids in the car? They're cheaper by the dozen, you know, was always Mr. Gilbert's response. He loved the horns. And could make people jump 10 feet in the air. Let's go on. Sometimes the car trips took them to picnics, and picnics were wonderful. The cook had prepared baskets of food. The kids could relax and play. Father might even engage in a game of badminton with them. It's a time to relax and have fun. But at the end of the day, Father insisted that they police the entire picnic area and pick up every single thing that they found and put them in the picnic baskets. Now, that was okay for the wrappers and the plates and the silverware that they had brought, but also it involved the apple cores and beer bottles and other things that might have been left there during the night in the baskets. And Father, of course, would go through it. What were you doing with this? My God, children, this is beyond my imagination. The trip home almost always involved what we euphemistically call a pit stop, but which Mr. Gilbreth called visiting Mrs. Murphy. The boys would go off on one side of the road, supervised by him. The girls off on the other side of the road, supervised by Mother, and then they would converge, bladders empty, back in the car for the remainder of the trip. No, wrong thing. Now, I can't get this open. How am I failing my responsibilities to you? This is dreadful. I had timed you coming in here to see how quickly you all assembled. This was what Mr. Gilbreth did when he wanted to call his children together. That's not a very good whistle. one whistle. Do we have a whistler in the audience? I'm a little on the dry side. I don't want to take a swig of... Very good. He would call his family and they would barrel down for assembly. Now, Mr. Gilbreth did a lot of traveling, so he always had goodies that he had brought back from his trips. Pocket watches, European chocolates, goodies that the kids would want, jackknives, hair ribbons for the girls. He had lots of goodies. The children were assembled not all that frequently, but they knew when they heard that whistle, they better appear. Of course, sometimes neighbor kids were playing in the house, and there might be more than the 12, but you know, that's okay. More is better than fewer. Foreign dignitaries, researchers, lots of people came and were rewarded or intimidated by meeting the Gilbreth children. There's a story behind this picture. On the day that World War II was declared, Mr. Gilbreth telegrammed President Wilson and said he was on his way to Washington and would serve in the War Department. He arrived, and he did. He developed optimal ways for assembling and disassembling weapons and set methods how to teach that to the troops. But Mrs. Gilbreth, rather than stay at home for an extended period of time with the children, loaded them onto the train and took off for California, where her family was. The family had never been out to meet her relatives, and this was a first. The 4-day train trip was an ordeal. Little tiny staterooms, kids packed two to a berth. Mrs. Gilbreth had brought along a lot of cereal and graham crackers and a sterno stove for soup to keep them fed. Kids, the boys especially, ran wild up and down the train. One of the younger children, Fred, had an upset stomach. Lillian was recuperating from a broken foot and just miserable and sore as could be. Did I mention Mother was probably about 7 months pregnant at the time, too? This was not an easy trip. No one had bathed for 4 days. And arrival in California was astonishing. They were met at the train by Henriette, the French chauffeur, who loaded them into not one, but 2 Packards to take them to Claremont, where the family home was. This was a very different lifestyle for the Gilbreth children to get used to. They had to be on their best behavior 24/7. The 2 adult brothers still remained at home, as did 4 sisters and Mrs. Gilbreth's parents. But also there was the French chauffeur, the cook, several gardeners, and chambermaids. Not exactly what the Gilbreths were used to. The relatives were very genteel. The children were called dear, dear Bill, dear Ernestine, dear Emily. And it was more than they could handle. The day that a party was being held for, see you later, was being held for Mrs. Gilbreth and the children to welcome them. Neighbors were coming, old family friends, school friends of hers. It was a big event out on the lawn. And to get ready for it, the lawn was being sprinkled and perfectly tended by all of those gardeners. The children were dressed to the nines, bows in the hair, jackets buttoned, Little Lord Fauntleroy pants. I mean, they were outraged by this. And one of them, Martha, took a look at the fountain and went, "This is my chance." She ran underneath, stripped off her hair ribbon, and just got drenched. Well, the other kids were initially horrified, and then like, yes, soaked, dripping. Oh, they had the time of their lives till Mother found them and behaved in a way they had never seen or heard before. "You children get upstairs. You have 10 minutes to make yourself presentable, get your hair combed, and get down here again." And they did. But from that time on, they did not maintain that high standard of behavior. They acted like normal kids, except when the older folk were having their naps in the afternoon. But they ran through the house, they ran through the kitchens, they had the time of their lives. Oh, actually, one of them, Bill, began calling his aunts dear as well. It was pretty good. This is a picture of the Shoe, the family's summer place on Nantucket. Now, we used to go to Cape Cod in the summer, and the drive there was an ordeal. I can just imagine what it was like to go all the way to Nantucket and on that ferry for the Gilbreths. But they did. The Shoe was pretty primitive. It had one bathroom, 12 children, 2 adults, schedules on the wall of who could go when and what they could do while they were in there too, might I add. But this was the opportunity for Mr. and Mrs. Gilbreth to relax and really enjoy being with their children, which for Mr. Gilbreth meant teaching them. Every minute, teach, 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 teach. But he had ways of making teaching fun. One of the things he brought with them was this gorgeous white typewriter. And remember, this is well before typewriters were at all common. And he set it down and said to the kids, have at it. Learn how to operate it. Type away. See what you can do. You know, improve your speed. He said, maybe I'll test you, and there might be some rewards for the fastest of you who can take dictation and type it out. Actually, maybe the fastest of all might even win the typewriter. Well, the kids practiced like mad. And then the day came for the testing. He ushered the children in, one at a time, and set them down at the keyboard. The only difference was, this time, the keys were covered, and they couldn't see what was on them. Now, you all know the first line of the typewriter, don't you?
ASDF?
QWERTYUIOP, which I learned when I was in 5th grade by reading this book. I don't know the other lines, but that one I certainly knew. Anyway, the kids were bewildered and baffled and did their best to type along. Some were much, much better than others. And it was quite surprising that the older children were not necessarily the best at it. And the white typewriter was duly awarded. It wasn't always fun and games, though. The girls were getting ready to revolt. They were getting old enough to be interested in boys, and there were lots of boys at the shore. However, Father insisted that they wear bathing costumes. Shoes, bathing stockings, a long skirt, covered sleeves. This is in an era when women had already discovered their ankles. They had discovered their calves and were about to discover their thighs. So they felt really out of step. But they had a way to deal with that. Then dress appropriately, and as soon as they were over the sand dunes and behind the house, off came the shoes, off came the stockings, off came the flouncy bathing skirt, and they were ready for action. Let's see. Oh, the other thing. Mr. Gilbreth taught his kids the Morse code. Remember that. That's going to come up later. Okay. Oh, there's the children with the latest arrival all lined up. Now, I have to tell you, there's a little bit of fabrication going on. The second-born child, Mary, died quite young, so there never were 12 children in the household all at once. But the Gilbreths acted just as if she was always there, and she was always part of the family and always included, especially in the head count. But here is everyone lined up for presentation. Aunt Anne. Mr. Gilbreth's sister, Aunt Anne, was a real martinet. She was a tough nut. And both of the Gilbreths had to be away at a speaking engagement, so Aunt Anne came to rule the family roost. The kids resented her presence and did not do well having someone as tough as she around. Mealtimes were especially difficult. You had to sit there until you had eaten every bite on your plate. You did not chatter or mumble to each other. You passed and were pleased and thank you and on your absolute best behavior, and the kids hated it. I would have too. Bill, one of the wilder ones, got an idea in his head and snuck under the table at the far end and crawled the length of it on his hands and knees, being protected by the tablecloth. Oh, God, doesn't pay to get old. Tablecloth, and came up to where Aunt Anne was sitting. He brushed against her. Do you have a dog? Why do you have a dog? 12 children is enough. A dog eating all that food, what a waste. She looked under the tablecloth, but of course by then, Bill had retreated to the other end. He did it again. She was even more infuriated. I'm sure you've got a dog. I'm positive you have a dog. Looked under, he was back at the other end. So she just casually dangled her hand down on her lap between her knees. Well, Bill couldn't resist that one now, could he? He stealthily crawled the length of the table, licked her hand, she grabbed him and hauled him up. That was the end of that good time. I have enough time, but not an illustration, to talk about one of my favorite episodes, the tonsils episode. Father did pioneering work in surgery, using motion study to develop ways of improving and enhancing the ways that surgeons did their jobs. Now, if any of you know surgeons, you probably realize they don't want people telling them how to do their jobs. They know how to do their jobs. But Father found that an instrument tray with the implements in order, pre-threaded sutures, scrub nurses to hand instruments, made the whole procedure a lot more efficient and time effective. Initially, he had trouble finding surgeons who would be willing to let him film their operations, and when he did, he rarely got to see the same surgery twice. But Dr. Burton, the family physician, played right into his hands when he told Mr. Gilbreth that 11 out of 12 of the children needed tonsillectomies. So, not going to waste that opportunity. Mr. Gilbreth had the dining room set up as an operating theater. In it were Dr. Burton, his nurse, and Mr. Coggin, the cameraman, who was going to be recording all of this, grinding away at 2 revolutions per second. There was one child, Martha, the only one with good tonsils, was farmed out to Aunt Anne, and she was gloating over the other kids. Oh, I'm going to be so special. I'm going to have ice cream tonight, and tomorrow for breakfast I'll have apple pie and donuts. Oh, and here you poor others who will be suffering. Well, one by one, the children were brought in, anesthetized, and operated on. And it was all going well. Mr. Coggin was grinding away, photographing it all. And everything was fine until Ernestine was brought in. Dr. Burton anesthetized her, looked in her mouth, said, "I told you not to bring Martha." Martha? Mr. Gilbreth was stunned. This isn't Martha. This is Ernestine. No, it's not. This is Martha. This is Ernestine. Well, I don't care who she is. She's got Martha's tonsils. So he decided, as long as Ernestine was anesthetized, he might as well do her too. Well, it wasn't such an easy job. It was pretty messy and pretty protracted. There was Mr. Coggin, green as could be, cranking away for the whole process. In the meantime, Martha had been sent for, dragged home, kicking and screaming, and stuffed to the gills with pastries, protesting bitterly, and brought in for surgery. All of the children really felt terribly sick afterwards, especially Martha, considering what she had been eating. Father told them to buck up. Remember the story of the little Spartan boy who hid a fox underneath his shirt, and the fox gnawed away at his vitals, and the little Spartan boy didn't make a sound of complaint and dropped over dead. Then, for some reason or other, Dr. Burton took a look at Father's throat and said, "Oh my, those tonsils really need to come out. They're the worst of the bunch." That was done days later in the doctor's office with a local anesthetic at Mr. Gilbreth's insistence. His mother, his sister, Mrs. Gilbreth, Dr. Burton all tried to talk him out of it, but he was adamant. I mean, I saw what happened with those kids. I can do a much better job than that. However, the children saw Mr. and Mrs. Gilbreth come home by cab. He was staggering. Cab driver had one arm, Mrs. Gilbreth had the other. They brought him up into the house, and the cab driver turns to him, Mrs. Gilbreth, and said, "Wow, he sure had a load on, didn't he?" Mother had a different story. Mr. Gilbreth came out of the first part of the surgery waving a tonsil in forceps. Nothing to it. Why did the children make such a fuss? Piece of cake. He went back in for the second tonsil. Wasn't so enthusiastic after that one. By the time he left the doctor's office, the anesthetic had worn off, and his high spirits had faded. He couldn't even contemplate driving a foolish carriage home. Oh, God, so they had to call a taxi. Now, Mr. Gilbreth went home, took to his bed, and stayed there for 2 weeks. The children had never seen him in bed, let alone for a day, let alone for 2 weeks. But he had a terrible time of it. The story is capped off by Mr. Gilbreth receiving a note from Mr. Coggin, the cameraman. I will read it to you. None of the motion pictures came out. Terribly sorry. I forgot to take the inside lens cap off. P.S. I quit. That was enough to get Father out of bed and back on his feet. I'll track him down to the ends of the earth and rip out his tonsils with a button hook. He doesn't quit. He's fired. It was colorful living in that house. It's reading the book for the first time as a kid, and it certainly wasn't the last time I read it, really spoke to me. The Gilbreths' children went through lots of embarrassment when Father would show up at school to see how they were doing and to investigate what their grades were and how they were. Well, I was embarrassed at school a lot too when my father would come as a speaker at assemblies and discuss the way that our family practiced safety at home, including having fire drills. I was mortified. But the book did influence the things that I taught my own kids. I had National Geographic maps hanging all over their bedrooms, push pins so we could put them in different countries. Where's that red one? Good job. I didn't give out rewards like he did, but they got attaboys for it. I taught my kids Morse code too. I don't know why. They had fun tapping it back and forth, back and forth. And I thought I had totally forgotten about it until I was watching the television show Endeavor, and I realized, oh my God, there's the Morse code. I know what that says. It was pretty spectacular. Now don't ask me how to go M-O-O-S-E, but anyway, we did endless card games featuring geography, spelling, math. I still add up the digits on license plates when I'm driving. Think about it, good way to keep those old minds going. Not that any of you are old. I claim the record for that. I also learned from Mr. Gilbreth awful plays on words. My favorite being the one that drove Lily absolutely wild. Two maggots were fighting in dead earnest. Gross, isn't it? I loved it. Anyway, there is a wonderful movie that came out in 1952. Maybe there's some fans of it here. Yes! And I'll tell you, this is checked out in my name right now, but I will be willing to go with you to the circulation desk, relinquish it if any of you want to check it out for nostalgic purposes. There was a subsequent movie, well, 5 of them actually, but don't bother getting the Steve Martin one. It's really nothing to do with this family. It's a travesty. So, that's the Gilbreth family. I could go on forever. Did anyone have any experiences reading the book or watching the movie that you'd like to tell people about?
TCM showed the version that you held up.
Really?
And it was the guy named Carter, I can't remember his first name, who was the announcer. And when it was over, he said, well, why did they kill the guy off? I don't think they should have killed the guy off. And I'm sitting at home saying, you dummy, do your homework. He died.
He died.
And she did his obligation to go do the speaking.
Oh.
So since then, when he's on, I just don't listen to him.
I need to thank Sue, who very kindly brought in the wonderful first edition, and you will all watch me relinquish it, even though it's a real treasure. And other things people might want to say, we have 4 minutes, and we don't waste time.
Have you read Time Out for Happiness?
Yes.
Which was the story of Frank and Lillian having met.
Yes, I have. And I've read Bells on Their Toes. I've read the books that Frank wrote about himself and about sports as well. All of the original Gilbreth children went to college. Some of them used their educations, some of them didn't. But there's a family association that you can look up on the internet that is all of the current Gilbreths chatting and doing things. And it's really interesting to see what they made of themselves and to wonder how much of it was because of the input they got when they were being raised. I'm done. Show's yours.